Welcome everybody to a episode with Astrid, your dietitian with T, no C, and I've got with me DJ Madson. I sort of like wanting to know more about you. I've been looking about your content, everything that you've been doing around female PEDs, peptides. You are very knowledgeable in an area that seems to be very interesting and emerging lately a lot more. There's a lot of question marks, a lot of gray areas, and there's quite a bit of noise around the information that is being discussed, especially in the social media. And also because we're talking about a lot of topics that sometimes seem to feel like a little bit of a taboo. Not many people like to talk about them. It feels like you're stepping into an area of a danger zone if you talk about them. So I think when I heard you talking so openly about all of these topics, PEDs, peptides, GLP-1s, blood work, HRT, brings a lot of like light to that noise that seems to be just needing a lot more someone who like you that is going to bring that truth and that clarity to this area. So before we go into that, I want to know a little bit more about you. What has brought you all the way to this point in your career? Why you do what you do and why you chose to pretty much do and work on this area?
So it really comes down to poor coaching practices. I'm actually still a student. I went back to school for translational pharmacology after my first master's degree. And my husband started bodybuilding, and we got him a local coach, and we put all of our faith into a coach, which is what you should do when you are a bodybuilder. You hire who you admire and respect their knowledge, and you trust that coach. And as a result, I had a very unhealthy sick spouse with gynecomastia. And that was the turning point where I said, hey, we're playing with pretty serious compounds. We're manipulating your hormones. We should probably take a bigger role in our own advocacy here. That's how I got started in all of this. And then it just kind of spiraled. Now it is my life. I do primarily consulting services. We have a couple of different companies here in the US. We offer direct to consumer blood work analysis and blood work as well. But it all started out by just trying to protect my husband.
It is so interesting how one mistake or one miscalculation, one extra dose, or one thing that is done incorrectly with these substances can mess up completely your blood work, your hormones, your internal physiology. So I think it is so interesting. And I want to know, perhaps just to dive a little bit deeper, before you even got into this, what was your life before that? So have you been an athlete for a long time? Have you been competing before? Um, your career, what was that history of yours before even getting into this area of your career?
Always an athlete, but normally what I competed in fell under World Anti-Doping Agency competition rules. So natural athlete, everything from horses to soccer. My husband and I actually both ride competitively. He's a dressage rider and I ride hunt seat. Always been an athlete in some capacity. I was in the Marine Corps and then I got out, started personal training, went on my own bodybuilding journey. I did NPC bikini, but then kind of put that on the back burner when we started coaching full time. And then now we have a full service coaching team where we offer standard nutrition services. We have a registered dietitian on staff, but everything was fitness related. And at the time, very little PED and I guess we weren't implementing PEDs with our clients at the time. We were only working with natural athletes. Then later on, we started really diving into endocrinology, hormones. I started working with perimenopausal women. When I started working with more transgender athletes as well, that's when we really got into the endocrine side of things. And I think that part alone really helped me in PED application. Because once you start playing with hormones for the purpose of transitioning or messing with somebody that has transitioned, and we're maintaining a very delicate balance in managing side effects, and then throwing in performance enhancement on top of that hormone manipulation, that gave me a really, really big insight into what potential we have in terms of side effects and management skills.
That is so interesting. Now, in this space where we're dominated by bro science and a lot of like gray areas, what misconceptions about female PEDs specifically usually gets to you the most? What frustrates you the most?
Anavar is a girl drug. That one.
Okay.
That one. I have seen more women virilize themselves on long-term cycles of Anavar than probably any other compound. That women can cycle testosterone is a really big one. There's a big difference between HRT, which is hormone replacement therapy, intended to be long-term or even lifelong at replacement optimal ranges, versus running a short duration cycle geared totally at performance enhancement only. I feel like in our industry, we are hearing more about PEDs. You said it yourself, it's less taboo, more people are talking about it. But the problem is the people that are talking about it are often promoting it. They're sharing their beautiful journeys where they didn't have side effects. And from a genetic standpoint, they handle it really well. And these women have beautiful, capped, bubbly delts, and they haven't masculinized yet. But on the back end, there's also those thousands of women that have permanently changed their facial structure, have clitoral growth, have body hair that's going to cost them a lot of money to have lasered off. They're going to have to come off of those hormones. They have permanently disfigured their voices. But those women aren't making content, and the internet's a mean place. They're not going to share their stories. So what we see as a result are PEDs being promoted and pushed on young female athletes that potentially still have fertility needs as well.
When do you know when you approach an athlete or an athlete comes to you and she asks you about PEDs? When is the right time? When have you identified for each athlete you have run and used all your natural potential? It is time for you to step up your game, especially if you are competing in a pro level. Do you even need to use PEDs? When is the right time for that particular athlete? How do you know?
I think it differs for everybody. And honestly, it's a case by case situation. I don't think there's even like a blanket questionnaire that we could even assign somebody. To me, I think a lot of things that we have to look at are going to be financial stability in their home life. We have to look at mental health, just like we would for even looking at a standard competition prep. Are you in a place where you can physically and mentally handle it? The other thing is we're going to look at fertility needs. We know that we're playing with hormones, and we look at baseline hormones. A lot of women feel they've maxed out their natural potential because they have. Maybe they are on a birth control option that's not really ideal and is very suppressive for them. And that by all means does not mean get off birth control, because let me tell you, if you want to mess up a competition prep, an unplanned pregnancy will do a lot more damage than having suboptimal hormones. But we can look at other options in terms of maybe a contraceptive that would be better for an athlete. And some women are simply deficient. They're looking at PEDs even for fat loss purposes only, but they may have thyroid dysfunction. So addressing underlying causes is going to be our first step. And what I tend to say, which is not very popular, is you should be able to manage your own body weight before you take performance enhancing drugs. So if you cannot squat your own body weight, if you cannot bench your own body weight, if you can't do a pull up, you probably shouldn't be taking the step into anabolic steroids. And that is a really unpopular opinion because women want to utilize steroids to get to that point. But to me, those are like basic life-saving tactics. You should be able to move your body weight as a competitive bodybuilder. And once you can do that, yeah, that might be a time where we start leveraging things. But I think managing your own body weight in your compound movements is probably a good baseline to have.
When you refer about moving your own body weight, you mean having enough time on the weight room that you actually have tried to explode your maximal natural potential, training, developing muscle, and working out to build your body before even thinking about PEDs. If you don't even have the structure in your bones, in
Exactly.
your muscles to look like you lift. Is that what you're addressing?
Yes, you should, and, like, I say the same thing to my male clients too. I'm like, if you're not already being accused of being on steroids, then it's probably not time to implement them. And a lot of people say that that's gatekeeping. That's a rough approach. But I'm gonna tell you, if you can throw your own body weight on your back and squat it, then I probably don't have to worry about the depth of your squat or your knees caving. I don't have to worry about your movement patterns. If you're moving that type of weight, especially as a female, that's a good indicator to me that you do have that time in the weight room and you've probably had that compliance and that consistency. It's very exciting to see progress the first 90 days, but that doesn't mean we throw in performance enhancing drugs at day 91 either.
Are you also referring to the fact that once you are using performance enhancing drugs, that will potentially increase also your injury risk because you get quote unquote stronger? So you start ego lifting or lifting heavier, but your bones and your joints are not even strong enough to cope with that increase of strength? Or does that align with what you're thinking in your
So
around
we actually
this?
see that even in advanced athletes as well. Even if somebody's a great candidate, and I think like this, you are a great candidate to start implementing these compounds, will do so in the safest manner possible. Even then, the increased risk goes up. And we look at male athletes implementing things like anadrol, which is like the number one way to make sure you get injured. We see this in all athletes of all levels because you are recovering at a heightened rate. You have great strength increases and rapid, but your bones, ligaments, tendons, they're not keeping up at the same rate. And then, especially if you lack that time in the gym, if you lack that foundation, it is tempting to do a 1 rep max. And most humans, especially if you are not a competitive power lifter with a coach overseeing your lifts, cannot safely do on 1 rep max. I know I can't. That's not how I'm trained, but it becomes very tempting when you start introducing PEDs that rapidly increase strength. So again, that foundation tells people, hey, I'm not trained to do this. I'm going to stay within my standard 8 to 12 rep range and stick there. And that's honestly the best thing we can do for injury prevention when we do have rapid strength.
Can you talk a lot more about what are some of the most commonly misunderstood compounds used by women that you probably believe are either misprescribed or overused?
Thyroid medication, which I know sounds odd because so many people suffer from hypothyroidism or have autoimmune issues like Hashimoto's impacting thyroid function. But in the bodybuilding industry, especially, we leverage Cytomel or T3 to enhance our metabolic rate during preps. But frequently, we see it abused both in off season and in season. We go to super physiological ranges where we're putting ourselves at greater cardiovascular risk. We are doing doses that are way beyond what's necessary. We do have hormonal downregulations when we're dieting hard. It's totally normal, but there's a difference in replacement levels versus abuse. And then instead of addressing some of the underlying issues like reductions in carb, lack of selenium or zinc, instead of addressing those deficiencies to improve thyroid function, we're throwing medication at that. That tends to be the most abused compound within our industry. That's not an anabolic steroid. I think stimulants in general, particularly bronchodilators like clenbuterol, are widely misunderstood in how they're implemented. I think for many people, it has a place. There's a lot of things I like about clenbuterol, but managing a safety profile and side effects is going to be more complex than just drinking added electrolytes per day. And then, of course, I think primobolan is a huge issue among female athletes, mostly because of the rate that we see counterfeit products being released into the market. And unfortunately, nobody's ever ethical. They're not faking it with another injectable DHT derivative like Masteron. We see it counterfeit. It's going to be fake, a test probe normally. So then we have something that's very androgenic and usually produces virilizing results even within a matter of weeks once it's implemented.
Okay. You mentioned T3, clenbuterol, primobolan, and Masteron. Out of those three or four, can you talk a little bit more about these ones? Because maybe they are not quote unquote as aggressive, or they don't seem to be seen as dangerous. And okay, well, T3, clenbuterol, they are not anabolics, they are not steroids. They should be safe if I use it here and there. If I abuse a little bit more, I am not going to get many side effects, or at least that's not going to fuck up with my hormones so much. That's probably what someone who wants to use PEDs or is thinking about it is thinking. It's in their brain. But what are some of the misconceptions around this specific four that you brought up, specifically the T3 and clenbuterol, that seem to be pretty mild? Like, hey, it's not steroids. Why not?
I think that is right. You nailed it on the head right there, is that it's not a steroid. It's crazy. And you still see the rise in popularity with peptides, even among general population, people who aren't even in the gym utilizing peptides to improve their body composition. But the fact that it's not a steroid is what I think draws so many people, and they assume it's safe because it's not directly impacting sex hormones, not realizing that there's other hormones in the body, and thyroid hormones do matter and they impact everything, our alkaline phosphatase levels, which is going to be important for long-term bone health. All of our systems are connected in one way or another, and a lot of these are on a specific axis. So what I like to say is, when we look at hormones, we consider it like a circle, and a circle is a series of arcs. And when you change the trajectory of one of those arcs, you no longer have a complete circle. And that's what we see anytime we're messing with compounds that can influence our hormones in any capacity. I think messing with thyroid, to me, is a big decision, especially because there's so many preliminary steps we should take, including extensive blood work before we make those decisions, especially to determine dosage. But it's kind of a scapegoat in the industry. Oh, you're not losing weight because you have poor thyroid function. Well, why do we have poor thyroid function? Have we assessed micronutrients? Have we looked at what their diet is? Do we have adequate carbohydrates for T4 to T3 conversion? Have we actually done labs? Have we checked reverse T3? A lot of those things are overlooked. And so people use thyroid basically as an excuse for lack of progress. And of course, clenbuterol has been touted as potentially anabolic for women, but the fact that it has anti-catabolic properties, a lot of people will leverage it in off season to try and stay lean or get lean while still developing or retaining good muscle. And they use it far too long. They're not looking at the changes in taurine and potassium. They don't understand the cardiovascular risks, potential for neurotoxicity at high dosages long term. And they complain about the side effects, not realizing that there's steps to mitigate those side effects.
What is a safe, like if you were to talk about using things safely, when you think about maybe the one that you brought up, the clenbuterol, how long is too long, or how long is enough for you to consider it? This is enough to be quote unquote safe and mitigate potential issues, especially around your heart, side effects. And sometimes even thinking, because I've come across with different competitors and people that want to come into a sort of like biohack the system, and they want to compete in a natural show, but they feel like, well, because this is a steroid, this is not a steroid, this could clear up fairly quickly in my blood, and I could just do like a quick 8 to 12 weeks, very, very perhaps 12 weeks out or something like that, so it is clear from my body. And if I do get audited, or I get the polygraph or any of these tests, I will be able to come out clean. How far from the show you should be completely off and away from these kind of like non-steroid compounds that are considered PEDs?
This is where I get really aggressive, because that to me falls under the fake natty category. You are either a natural athlete or you are not. And if you want to take compounds but still not have the results of a steroid user and feel comfortable calling yourself natural just because you're using PEDs that aren't steroids, that's one thing. But I will not offer assistance with that in any capacity, because when we are competing in natural federations, I know we have like NANBF and OCB, especially in the bodybuilding realm. You are expected to be clean. I think it's within like 7 to 10 years. Every federation is a little bit different, so don't quote me on that, but you're expected to be drug free for about a decade prior to that. It doesn't mean clean at the time of your competition, it means clean in general. And there can be therapeutic use waivers for those that have hypothyroidism and conventional HRT in women. So maybe like estradiol and progesterone, but you're not going to see a therapeutic exemption more than likely for something like testosterone. So some of these compounds can be cleared very quickly, very quickly. And that's what we see is people taking compounds in their off season and then going and competing against actual natural competitors and succeeding, winning, obviously doing great, but they appear clean because of detection time. And that's a huge ethical concern in our industry. And to me, it's weird. Like, why even be proud of something you did when you, yeah, you might have wiped the floor with everybody, but you're the one on drugs and they aren't. When you come off of an anavar cycle, you don't lose all of your muscle tissue. That strength doesn't just disappear. If you're eating right and strength training, you're going to retain everything you built. So you are forever at an advantage over the athletes that have never taken PEDs. So if I find out someone that is working or working towards a natural federation, I do not offer PED guidance, which is odd because there's actually a lot of things that you can do, like injectable carnitine is permitted. I work with a lot of endurance athletes, and we can leverage things that are considered legal in their sports and they're able to be utilized in the WADA. But peptides are a big one that are now considered PEDs and were not just a few years ago.
What are other compounds that you think are legally permitted, or and others that probably seem to be very mild or very innocuous, but they could still be considered PEDs, even if they're not steroids? Like if we think about glucose disposal agents, metformin, any other that maybe comes to your mind, what are some of those that you probably will think you shouldn't be using these if you are in a natural federation or trying to be natty?
So I guess I don't have strong opinions on that, because there are some people that believe that supplemental protein sources would technically make you unnatural. I think it's very subjective. So I think it's just safer to fall under whatever federation guidelines you compete in. I've always felt that peptides in general, the whole genre of peptides, whether it be a GLP or growth hormone or a GHRP, even BPC 157, I've always considered those very blatant performance enhancing drugs. And some of them are just now on the WAD watch list. Some of them have already been banned by NCAA, but those do give a huge advantage. Are you going to look like you do on Anavar? Of course not. But you do have better recovery. You have increased IGF levels. There are going to be advantages to taking that, especially in terms of recovery and injury prevention and or healing during difficult preps, whether you are a performance athlete or it's simply going to be a physique athlete. There's a lot of benefits to adding those. But that becomes a very controversial topic because so many people utilize them for the biohacking trends and for longevity. They don't like to be grouped into the category of performance enhancing drug users. But I like that quote: the future is enhanced. We have these tools. I like to use them just as safely as possible and on an as needed basis.
You spoke about extensive blood work before even thinking about any additional PEDs or peptides or anything. What are some of these specific blood markers you're looking at? And when you think about the extensiveness of this blood work, what are you digging deeper into?
I like very extensive labs because blood work is like a puzzle. Each piece matters, but by itself, it doesn't hold a lot of relevance. Everything has to be put together. As a standard, we look at a CBC. That's what we call it here. There's probably a hematology report. So we're looking at essential information, but again, in the PED context, we're checking for candidacy based on blood viscosity, maybe B12, folate, or iron induced early anemias that we can spot in that panel. With that, I like to check iron and ferritin levels, especially if we do have a PED user or even just male or female on TRT. That can increase the body's use and demand of iron. So ferritin's a big one. We want to do a full metabolic profile or chemistry report. So we're checking liver function, renal function, but some of these numbers can come back odd, especially as high performance athletes. I'm sure you've done your blood work and your BUN and creatinines come back a little bit higher. We take creatine, we eat high protein diets. So then we have to go the extra mile, get the lab markers for maybe cystatin C to confirm actual renal function, a marker that's not going to be influenced by those outside factors. GGT for liver training can falsely elevate some of those enzymes, especially our AST. And then we check for fluid balance markers, fasting blood glucose. But again, if we're talking optimization, I don't want just fasting blood glucose. Like I had cake last night. I didn't check mine this morning. I want to see your fasting insulin. I want to pair this with your lipids. A lot of the compounds that women lean on specifically are going to be more hepatotoxic, bad for your liver. We have a reduction in HDL and an increase in LDL. So I want to see your lipids along with your liver health. But blood work can get very extensive. It can almost seem excessive, but when you put the pieces of the puzzle together and you're trying to optimize that baseline, we need to see your sex hormones. We need to calculate progesterone to estradiol ratios, thyroid function, everything. I want to see adrenal markers as well. All of this plays such a big role in your day-to-day performance and quality of life at the end of the day. I feel like a lot of people seek out PEDs just because they don't feel good. But we improve those baselines, sometimes we can eliminate the need for additional enhancements.
Even when you think about it, it's hard to find legit places that can give you the option to have a very thorough blood panel taken, especially for, like, if you think about certain countries, it's very limited. Like I go to my normal GP and they just ask me for very basic, very simple blood work that doesn't cut it out. Like even like if I have no intention to go into the enhancement route or anything, I still get such a basic information about my blood work that it doesn't even match the needs for a high performing athlete or someone who has been 50 weeks, 42 weeks, 36 weeks or a little bit less on a dieting phase, building phase, cutting, building. So I know that there's been more recent emerge of different type of labs that are doing that worldwide and providing a lot more thorough information and doing this blood work. But it seems to be really hard to know how would that work, especially if you're doing that service online or across from a different country. How does that work when you think about these type of services that are worldwide providing this extensive blood works investigation?
We're seeing it pop up because especially like in your area and a lot of the countries that I work in, getting lab work on clients is our biggest challenge. We have no way, even like just up in Canada, getting estradiol pulled in a male is like pulling teeth. So I'm excited to see that we have more of these direct consumer services popping up. There's even programs like throughout the UK that basically have no questions asked, free blood work, and they travel. You can go and get your blood work done there. But then we have the issue of, okay, now we have general population with their blood work results. We don't know what to do with them. Just because you get the labs doesn't mean you know what to do with them. That's one of the things. That's what I do pretty much full time is I offer consulting services. We do blood work analysis. But I'm just hoping we see a rise in popularity because as the demand increases for performance enhancing drugs and performance optimization in general, we're going to have to see this blood work become available because there's no way to do it safely if you don't see what's going on internally.
Okay. When you think about signs that a PED protocol is causing harm that could be overlooked or be normalized, what are some of these signs you're like seeing clearly that are red flags that something is causing harm and you feel
So
like
many
is
things.
and you think that, hey, this is all good.
I think paying attention to biofeedback, and that's where, especially if a coach is working with a client, it can be more difficult if you are providing yourself the PEDs to make an objective assessment. But we have to pay attention to all of the standard biofeedback. So our mental health, our sleep quality, our mood, our digestion, blood pressure, blood glucose, those are all our main surface level health concerns. Those are the basics that apply to everybody, even enhanced or not enhanced. Then we start looking internally. Our lab markers can tell us a lot, but especially when we're talking about female athletes, I feel like the number one thing that gets overlooked is the start of virilization or masculinization. A lot of women will have hard boundaries, and I encourage any woman out there that's ever considering the use of androgenic compounds to set boundaries for yourself. Share them with your coach, your spouse, your friend, your mother, your father, someone in your life. Because what happens is women will get on these compounds and say, well, this is where I draw the line. But they start getting really good results. They love how they look. They love how they feel. Libido's through the roof. They feel like Superwoman. But then those side effects that they said no to start popping up. And instead of saying, I'm off of it, I'm done, we're calling it, I said that was a no, they keep pushing. They go a little bit longer. Well, I feel so good at 6 weeks. I'm going to go to 7 weeks. I'm going to go to 8 weeks. Well, I'll just push it to 12. Well, the show date got canceled. And instead of restarting, I'm just going to push through. Those small judgment calls are what's going to lead to lifelong permanent side effects and virilization.
How do you assess damage versus adaptation when you're thinking and looking at your labs, especially when you refer to these long-term users? When is the damage and when is just adaptation to those PEDs?
It would have a lot to do with the compound's specific pharmacodynamics. And this is why I think understanding basic pharmacology is very important. And why bro science is pretty important. I know that sounds crazy, but it does take a balance because we're looking at a lot of compounds that have been studied extensively in humans. But under clinical settings with specific demographics, we have to take that information and now apply it to high performing athletes. And that's not who we're looking at in terms of demographics. Then we also have to look at long term anecdotal evidence from the people that have been abusing these compounds and then understand the pharmacodynamics of what to expect. I would never put someone on an oral steroid and expect their liver enzymes to look perfect throughout that entire cycle, no matter how much glutathione we throw them on. So we have to understand the nature of the compounds. We know that some things are going to influence prolactin, some are going to increase estradiol or reduce it. In women, our entire HPO axis is normally suppressed depending on the anabolic that we're utilizing. So understanding the mechanism of action really helps us with assessing blood work. And then, of course, we look, our number one goal is always going to be recovering what has been damaged. Your lipids are going to take a hit. There's no doubt. Like if you do an anavar cycle, your lipids will change. That doesn't mean that it's long term. It just means that when you are done with that cycle, we focus on getting things back on track. But this is the importance of evaluating, are we on HRT? Are we running actual cycles? What does our baseline blood work look like? Because if you have terrible lipids to begin with, then you probably shouldn't be messing with compounds that will negatively impact lipids.
I have a few follow-up questions. You really brought up the aspect of some side effects and some blood markers that will take a hit. But talk to me about liver toxicity and how this usually seems to be very important to take into consideration, mostly when you're considering taking oral steroids versus injectables. And what is the difference between these two when it comes to mechanism of action and safety?
I think a lot of people automatically prefer orals because they don't have to stab themselves, right? Nobody wants to stab themselves, but this actually comes down to a molecule modification. So a lot of people will say, "Well, I just take X, Y, and Z, but the injectable version, well, it's still inherently liver toxic because again, it's a modification. So it has to survive first pass metabolism in order to be bioavailable and used by your body. It's the nature of the compound. Your liver is going to take a hit when you take hepatotoxic compounds. That's just the nature of it. But unlike our kidneys, our livers can take a hit and recover very well. And we know this, and we have, decades of evidence supporting this. And again, that bro science, we see it. We see these guys wreck their livers on cycle, and then 6 to 8 weeks later, everything looks great. But just because we accept that, we understand that something is inherently toxic, doesn't mean we ignore it, doesn't mean we don't address it. We make sure that we're deploying prophylactics and compounds to help keep someone as healthy as possible. Injectable glutathione happens to be my favorite cycle support in general, whether we're taking an oral or it's an injectable, whether something's neurotoxic. Injectable glutathione is hands down my favorite support.
What is the pathway when you do take something orally? When it comes through looking at your GI tract, it gets absorbed in specific areas, or usually in the small intestine? Where is it usually these molecules or these compounds being targeted to be absorbed? And then what is like the first toll they have to kind of like first pass that your body is going to revise it, check it, and then distribute it?
So you will actually hear a lot of people complain about GI issues from orals, and that is one of the very few arguments to use an oral in an injectable form, is because it does impact GI health and can cause that disruption in your digestive system. But with orals, you'll also hear, specifically with Anavar, and this is a huge myth that you hear on the internet, is that it's actually more renal toxic than anything. And then the theories, well, the metabolites are processed via the kidneys, they're excreted via the kidneys, so therefore you're going to have a huge degree of renal toxicity. But again, this is something that's been proven in a clinical setting. Like, the inherent risk is always going to be liver toxicity with orals. But we have people that take things like milk thistle as an example. And this actually inhibits enzymes that are required for certain metabolic processes within the liver. And essentially it extends the half-life. So one could argue that it could technically make a compound more effective, but we're increasing exposure time, inherently making it more toxic. So then we move to things like TUDCA and NAC if we're not doing an injectable glutathione. But there's different supports. And again, like, we see disruption in the gut microbiome as well. And that's why a lot of people move to injectables. So some of it comes down to preference and what personal side effects you're dealing with. And that's where the coach comes in and says, these are the changes that I have to make based on what you're exhibiting. We can only address the known fat factors. Like, omegas are going to be one of the most powerful things we can do. That's going to address lipid changes, liver changes, as well as your renal health.
Thinking about GLP-1s now taking a lot more popularity, where do you stand on these, not just on safety, but more so the abuse of these compounds for people that are non-diabetics or non-obese to achieve better physique? Maybe not necessarily within the bodybuilding sphere, but outside that. How do you, what's your stance on these specific compounds, peptides?
If you don't have a medical need, it's a performance enhancing drug. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's a performance enhancing drug. And I actually prefer to see it abused by athletes, because I think that typically we're taking a more active role in what we're consuming. We're looking at our macro and micronutrient content. We're fueling ourselves. We're controlling the rate of loss, so we're not entering a catabolic state. I think we are in for a long-term health crisis where men and women all over the world don't have any muscle. We have no bone density. We are going to need assistance getting in and out of chairs by the age of 65, because we have destroyed our bodies by depriving ourselves of essential nutrients. The fact that people are using it to remove food noise is one of the hardest things for me to hear, because we have taste buds for a reason. We have food noise for a reason. It's a survival mechanism. When you walk by a plate of cookies, you should want that plate of cookies. That's literally an instinct. So when we're removing that perfectly normal, healthy food noise, we are not setting up the general population for long-term good habits or sustained fat loss. When I hear maintenance dose of GLP, it gives me goosebumps. Like, it's in the worst way. It is, it's terrifying that people are not using such an amazing medication that is medically warranted for so many people to positively change their eating habits. They are leaning on it, abusing it, and essentially ruining their bodies long term.
What are some of
Also, I
the
take GLPs. I'm one of those abusers, by the way. I just want to throw that out there.
what are some of the most common categories and type of GLP-1s that are currently in the market that you seem to find mostly utilized within the fitness community? Nowadays, there's a couple of influencers that I've heard talking about peptide that can actually help you gain muscle without even training. I have no idea if that's true, but where is your stance on these varieties of GLP-1s, and is there any difference between them when you think about the effectiveness, side effects, and maybe what they targeting when it comes to managing hunger cravings, preserving lean body mass, those kind of things?
Right now, we're seeing growing popularity with retatrutide, and there's a couple reasons why we're seeing such popularity. One, it's not approved for use in humans yet. It's still in late phase human clinical trials. So until Eli Lilly can regulate it, they're going to come for me just because I said their name on the internet. But until Eli Lilly can regulate it, right now, everything that's being done in the gray market world is just promotional for their product. We have semaglutide, which is a GLP. This is it's not actually our first generation. I don't know much about the first generations. That was kind of before my time, but semaglutide is kind of our standard. That's what started everything. Everyone knows it as Ozempic. This is where everything started, as a glucagon-like peptide agonist. And then we had tirzepatide, which also came out, I believe, as a gastric inhibitory peptide mechanism of action. It's a GLP-GIP. It's actually a glucose-dependent insulinotropic polypeptide agonist. So you had a stronger effect than semaglutide with a reduced side effect profile. Pretty cool one. I like it. And we are finding that it helps reduce pro-inflammatory cytokines. So people that may have autoimmune related issues have a reduction in inflammation. So there's some off-label use. Higher doses yields reductions in triglycerides. I don't know if that's a direct mechanism of action or as a result of the higher dose resulting in reduced insulin resistance. Maybe a relationship there. But retatrutide has a glucagon agonist effect, which actually increases your metabolic rate. It increases daily energy expenditure for an individual. But that can be an issue for somebody that's at cardiovascular risk, has an increased heart rate already, prone to anxiety. It can impact your HRV, sleep. But I think the growing popularity of retatrutide in the bodybuilding community has really helped make GLPs mainstream for people that might not have medical necessity. And the only GLP I've tried and will use is retatrutide.
It's interesting you mentioned these as things that can be very helpful, but when it comes to sourcing this kind of stuff, is when it comes like, okay, this is such a gray market. This is like a underground labs. Like, yeah, you hear about it, but you have no clue where to source it rightfully and quote unquote safely, and that you're gonna get what you're looking for. So when it comes to sourcing, especially this kind of peptides or compounds, how do you go about it?
So if you're in the US, we are super haphazard and we give everything out prescription like candy. So it's not hard to get it here. But in other areas, you are going underground. That's really going to be your only way to get a medication when you don't have a medical need for that medication. So, what I typically recommend is, obviously there are going to be more reliable sources that are well known within our communities. But what happens if you're not a part of that community? That's where we are going to rely on third party HPLC testing. Janishik is kind of they have taken on like the golden pillar role in PED testing. You can actually send in compounds for testing through their labs. But third party testing tends to be what we lean on heavily. Otherwise, there's no way to know what you put on your body. And even though some of these websites will provide a certificate of analysis, there's certain pieces that have to be present. They should be able to be cross-referenced, and not everybody, or at least here, our biggest issue is companies are stealing COAs from other countries or other companies and cropping out who it was prepared for. So I actually did a video series on like what to look into for a COA, what pieces should and shouldn't be there, batch IDs, and then the ability to cross-reference and confirm that that company sent that batch to that testing facility on that date. But third-party testing is that's our biggest safety net.
Where are currently most women getting their PEDs from? And again, is this something that probably seems to be so misunderstood and very shady, especially when it's banned or when it's not very well spoken in some areas? Like here in Australia, for example, that is a complete taboo. Like even if you speak to certain personal trainers, you may have an idea that they probably know a lot more about sourcing these things, but because it's such a bit of a risk and is forbidden, then no one really talks about it. So athletes that are looking to get something decently safe or legit, they have no idea where to go or who to ask or where to even source it in the right, I guess, using the right channels.
Fortunately, I think most athletes are getting it directly from their coaches. I think that's a really dangerous area when the person that you're trusting with your health becomes your drug dealer. But at the same time, in some cases, that might be the safest and most logical approach to sourcing for some athletes that don't have those channels. But I'd say most are getting it from their coaches. So I always tell people, did you bring up PEDs? Were you a candidate? Do you compete in a federation where enhancements are allowed? Was this pushed on you? Was it encouraged? Because if somebody can make financial gain by putting you on drugs, they're more likely to push PEDs at an inappropriate time. That's where there's a lot of ethical concerns. And that's kind of what I tell people is probably shouldn't have your coach and your drug dealer be the same person. Now, again, we're in the US, so sourcing is not very difficult here at all. Obtaining COAs is not difficult. A lot of PEDs, especially what females are leveraging, can be prescribed through online telehealth clinics with sometimes that without even blood work. But in other countries, it's a lot more difficult. And that's where I see a lot of sourcing concerns because you are having to rely on that bro network, is what I like to say. You guys don't have the same access that we do here.
Yeah, I agree. Where do you personally recommend sourcing peptides from, especially if they're internationally shipped to certain countries where customs can be a bit of a pain in the ass, or be looking at this as, yeah, these are forbidden compounds. How do you even get them through to be relatively safer to deliver to the person that is in a country that could be banning these compounds?
The popularity of peptides, as difficult as it is, I really would recommend trying to source from within your own country versus relying on international shipping because of the potential degradation of peptides. By the time that, especially now that we're in the summer months, we know that temperature fluctuations are crucial. And I've seen peptides shipped just wrapped in a piece of bubble wrap and thrown into an envelope, whereas some companies are going to send them with cooling packs. They're going to be in bubble wrap within a box, within a box, within a box, within your envelope. And that's more what we're looking for. But I would try and avoid international shipping of peptides specifically because they are very delicate and they're not going to handle the shipping extremes that you would see with other compounds. And again, large volume orders are going to catch attention at the end of the day.
Okay. How often do you come across peptides that are bunk underdose or perhaps totally fake? And what's the impact of using them unknowingly?
In the beginning, I think that this was relatively common. Now, I think we even had a new website pop up that is ranking peptides. Still not sure what the end game is. Not sure how they're making money. They're doing everything for free, supposedly. But if you look at the board of directors, they're all very high-end venture capitalists. So something's happening there. But they are doing free testing and ranking these peptides based on potency. They're doing microbial testing. They're looking at fills to match, what's put on the label. I think it's a lot. I never want to use the word safe, but safer now than what we saw 1, 2, 3 years ago, because people are aware that COAs exist and more people are finding affordable ways to pay for third-party testing. They're not even trusting the COAs anymore. They're sending in batches themselves for testing.
Are there any peptides that are commonly sold but particularly dangerous or misinterpreted in the online forums?
I think a lot of them have potential for danger. My issue is I think a lot of the data is misinterpreted. Like when people are using AI and chat GPT to generate transcripts about compounds with no formal education and what these do or how to even interpret clinical data. So they tell people about these amazing things these drugs can do, but they might not even have left an in vitro state. We don't even have rodent data on some of them. So on paper, they sound great, but we have no actual human data or practical application for them yet. I think it's crazy what people are willing to put in their bodies as long as they don't call it a steroid.
What about SARMs? It's something that it used to
I
have
hate
its
SARMs.
popularity a long time ago. They started getting a bad reputation, but I don't know right now whether that has improved in the research and they are now a lot more popular, or they have completely been dismissed.
I feel like so pro hormones were kind of before my time, but they took the place of the pro hormone era. I hate SARMs so much. I have never seen blood work look so bad than by people utilizing SARMs. I that's probably my least favorite PED. I don't see a lot of application for them. In theory, they're wonderful, selective androgen receptor modulators. So wouldn't that be great if we just had all this wonderful tissue selectivity and we just grew muscles with no side effects? But again, we're looking at the liver toxicity profiles, the visual disturbances that occur. You don't know what you're getting. One of my friends had said SARMs are the equivalent to what got thrown out at the lab, and then somebody on night crew came and scooped it up and decided to sell it to teenagers. That's what SARMs are. We have way too much clinical data and long-term use on actual anabolic steroids to consider the use of an unregulated market of SARMs.
Okay. Now, what is your advice for someone considering buying GLP-1s through telehealth sites that advertise? No, I don't know. I guess that they are advertised on social media.
I mean, if you can get it prescribed, then it's coming from an FDA regulated compounding pharmacy, then go for it if that's the choice that you want to make. But at the end of the day, when you do get it prescribed, that doesn't mean that you are using it responsibly just because you obtained it legally. I always tell people the same thing: control your rate of loss. A lot of people using GLPs don't track their macros or calories at all. So how do you watch your diet when you've never tracked food? So I just tell people adjust your dose based on rate of loss. Don't lose more than 1% of total body weight per week. That tends to be a general rule of thumb for most people using GLPs. And I think that's one of the ways to help retain muscle tissue on individuals that are not physique athletes and not paying attention to the foods they're consuming.
Okay. Yeah, it totally makes sense. And I think it is important to also bring that knowledge and getting educated before doing or using these kind of compounds at all. Now, what is your stance on a strong, quote unquote, fat burners? There's been a lot of evidence suggesting that using fat burners really don't make much of an effect when you look at the proprietary blend and the things that they're using for the most part, and mostly caffeine tends to be the one only thing that actually helps to increase that metabolic rate or burn body fat. But what about other compounds like ephedrine or johimbine? Where do you stand on this? fat burners?
I try not to use them personally, and I usually discourage the use. I think we end up with more dangerous, life-threatening side effects and complications from the use of major stimulants than any other compounds. And I just feel like most people, there's not really a notable use case. Again, if we're managing our thyroid effectively, carb cycling if needed for energy and performance, leveraging things like caffeine, maybe balancing with L-theanine, I don't really see a use case for them unless somebody's on an extreme timeline. But why would we be on an extreme timeline? Why would we not have planned adequately? Why would we not change a show date? The stage is always there, but your health comes first. I don't particularly like the use, even yohimbine. I'm not a fan of, and I thought I was dying. I can't even take pre-workouts that contain it. But yeah, I'm not a particular fan. I just feel like most people, if things are done correctly and you have an appropriate off season or you're set up appropriately on high calories and you're in a good health range, metabolically speaking, then you probably don't need them. And if we're talking more for general population and you're clinically obese, you didn't get that way in 8 weeks. So you shouldn't try and get rid of it in 8 weeks. I just don't think there's a lot of I don't think there's a lot of argument for use for most of them.
Suppose that the use is more like, okay, I've tried doing my calorie deficit, I've tried to do my cardio, I do all of these things, but I have a stubborn body fat. And so these fat burners will help mobilize a lot more efficiently this stubborn body fat. How do you coach or help someone around this mindset or with this problem that sometimes is very common within the fitness industry? I have a stubborn body fat around my thighs or in my glutes or in my belly, and I really need something else that just goes beyond just being on a eternal calorie deficit or doing more cardio, or when these things tend to just get to a limit when you no longer can do or add more. So how do you approach these situations of clients with a stubborn body fat deficit? Do they just need to continue to lose body fat and stay for longer in a calorie deficit? How do you manage these situations?
Personally, I'm really mean. And if I feel that somebody says they're stuck, or maybe they are really stuck at that point in time, I'm going to say, okay, time for a diet break and pull them out of a deficit. It is what it is. That's how I would handle it. And then we re-enter it, and I explain to them we're not going to spot reduce. And the issue is that you've had this body fat for a long time. It's very dense, and we have to work through it. And when you get lean enough, it will go away. It's not like you're going to retain this really weird pocket. If you want it gone now, then go get it sucked out of your body. If you want to do it the right way, we're going to increase your calories, make sure your metabolism and your health is on point, and then we'll keep cutting. People don't like that answer though. They want to do AOD 9604 and take their carnitine and do fasted cardio. And if that makes them feel better, then absolutely. I'm all about a strong placebo effect if it makes them think they're going to legitimately spot reduce fat. If they think doing a lot of ab crunches is going to suddenly make all of their adipose tissue in their stomach go away, then by all means. I'm just not necessarily going to condone anything that puts their health at risk. But realistically, those issues come from long-term adipose tissue. It's very dense and it's got to be worked through like anything else. I'm an example of that myself. I hold more in my stomach and I don't love it. And it's definitely gotten better as my composition has stayed lean throughout the years. I had to get uncomfortably lean to work through what everybody would refer to as my stubborn fat. It's where I hold. And if I get lean enough, it goes away. And then I controlled myself coming out of that show. And now I don't hold a lot there. It was uncomfortable, but it was also, I always tell people, is it more uncomfortable to have the dietary compliance and get the body that you're chasing after? Or is it going to be more uncomfortable to consistently have that body that you don't like and then take a bunch of drugs that still aren't doing anything for it? Just get
I
leaner.
agree. Yeah. Something that I say all the time is get lean once and never get fat again.
Yes.
That's it.
Yes. It changed. And you can say that to someone. You can show them pictures, but until you've experienced it yourself, and it's the best thing I've ever done. And that's one of the things, if nobody if people do one bodybuilding show their whole life, they do a transformation challenge, something, it's just a one-time thing, you will benefit from it. What you learn about yourself, your body, and for those people that are trying to get through what they call those stubborn areas, that's the way to do it.
It's truly about skills and learning that you gotta master not just getting there, but actually maintaining that new version of yourself. Because the problem is people do this, as you mentioned, these transformation challenges, 12 weeks, 16 weeks. They can lose a lot of weight. They can get leaner. Some people get great results, but because it was such a short period of time, and sometimes the mindset of that was just transform the body, there was no time for learning behavior change or mindset around maintenance, around how you handle all the things that will come up in life that will affect your weight maintenance, like emotional eating. Life getting in the way, and then you're not even being able to master your emotions, and then you just eat your emotions all the way back to the way that you were before, or stress management or sleep, or all of these things that usually, if you have not learned that is part of the equation of maintaining successfully that new version of yourself, that is going to be really, really hard to.
And you had said earlier, you said, what is one of your, when you're looking at candidacies for PEDs, what's something that's important? That right there, food relationship. Are
Mhm.
you comfortable eating at maintenance calories and have a good relationship with food? That's a huge one. And I do fall prevention for older adults. I go to nursing homes. I teach nonprofit fall prevention classes. And let me tell you, the people that underate, it shows. The people that don't have enough protein and muscle, it shows. Having a good relationship with food should probably be everybody's initial goal.
I agree. And I think it's just a little bit of a topic that is hard, because if you think about it, we all in some way, shape, or form have a little bit of disorder eating, if you think about it, because you can lose weight sustainably and learn how to master a healthy weight, but there's always some part of you that you will never be 100% happy with your body, that there's something always that you're not really like about your body image. There's something about your nutrition, your diet that is very particular about, that you're very particular about, or maybe there are some food thoughts and food noise that comes back and forth sometimes. So managing and having a healthy relationship with food, or not having an eating disorder or disorder eating, is something that I think I put is in such a high regard as a coach. I think just understanding where you're at with your relationship with food, and try to see all these different things that will affect how you feel and how you manage your food choices, your thoughts, your relationship with yourself, beyond just the relationship that you have with certain foods, and being able to master a diet that allows you to see everything in as a continuum, rather than having foods that are in pedestals, and they just bring a lot more noise than actual help.
I think it's hard. It requires some degree of self-awareness. I was on a set meal plan for 2 years. Even after I'd said, "I'm not gonna bodybuild anymore. I'm just gonna focus on coaching." I was still on a set meal plan. I had almost forgotten how to eat intuitively like a normal human. And that's so because of that, because of where I had failed myself and lacked that self-awareness, that's something I push with my own clients as well, as we need to also focus on long-term sustainability, not just this plan, not just fat loss, but what we can do in the long run, and prioritize your protein and enjoy foods in social settings without diving into guilt trips or binge behaviors. And again, we throw in drugs into the mix and it can amplify a lot of our food relationship issues. And it's not just, I hate when people think about eating disorders as just women not eating enough, because it's so much more extensive than that. It's far reaching. It affects males, females, older adults, teens, and it can be overeating, undereating, binge problems. It can be fears. It can be fixations. There's so many different forms of it. And again, a lot of these drugs can exacerbate those issues.
Yeah, and actually that was one of my questions that I wanted to talk to you about. What psychological changes do you see the most often when someone enhanced are just getting away or coming off PEDs? So like body image shifts, post-show enhancement phases, and then like you're coming off these drugs, your body's likely to experience some adjustments, some changes. Your diet is going to potentially adjust. Your body composition may or may not change. How do you manage that? What is your sort of like process to educate and sort of like encourage this client or this athlete to be in a good place, knowing that they won't longer be using or having the effects of the PEDs, or feel like they are on the top of the world, and then now what happens after?
Unfortunately, they do feel like they are on top of the world, and then they crash, and they crash hard, and it's bad. I'd say it's very similar to what people experience in terms of post-show blues, but a lot of it is not going to be perception, it is actual reality. Their bodies are changing. Everyone immediately thinks they're losing muscle. They might be, they might not. You're going to lose the water retention, you're going to lose the enhanced glycogen stores. Your shoulders are not gonna be as bubbly as they were on cycle. It's plain as day, but it doesn't mean you're necessarily losing the tissue that you accrued. So we see body image issues, and then we usually see a crash in hormones, especially if we're talking about a female user versus a male that's staying on what we call a cruise or TRT. We are crashing our hormones. You know, Anavar, again, I keep going back to that, but that tends to be the most common performance enhancing drug in the, anabolic steroid family. It's very suppressive to the HPO axis. You want to feel like menopause? That's a nice little preview, because everything is suppressed and your joints frequently get achy, and now you have to recover all of the hormones that have declined during that time period. You basically have no testosterone unless you were on TRT to begin with. You feel terrible, and especially with women, libido from androgenic compounds. Wow, incredible, especially for older women where it's already been declining. It's like they're 19 again. And then to lose that, and then there's going to be an impact on their relationship, their home life. We think about even just mood fluctuations around ovulation or entering the follicular phase or something. Like, imagine that amplified by 100. That's going on and off these compounds that mess with your sex hormones. So educating clients is really the only thing we can do. Is this is what it's changing your body. This is what's going to happen when you come on, and this is what's going to happen when you come off, and doing our best to prioritize recovery. And again, that's why we always look at that baseline, especially in our older adults. We can frequently look at HRT, and that makes it a much more gentle transition when we come off those drugs.
In your experience, how does enhance women, you see that their reproductive health is affected? And so what steps can be taken to protect fertility if this is desired?
If fertility is a goal, then we stay away from steroids typically. Simple as that. Even if we were to opt for something that's not quite as suppressive, like primobolan, we're still going to see extreme HPO axis disruption. Fertility, especially if there's like immediate goals, like, hey, we're going to try for a baby in 6 months, in a year, then we're probably not even, I would not recommend implementing steroids in any capacity. And if somebody's really eager just to use something, because that seems to be trendy now, people just want to put drugs in their bodies, then there's lots of other PEDs that don't impact your sex hormones that you can utilize.
It makes sense.